Welcome to the series Night 1 to Fall Asleep Fast, a place where you don't need to do anything at all except listen and let your thoughts slowly settle. Before you drift off, you can gently like this video and, if you wish, leave a quiet comment sharing where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Tonight, we gently explore Amsterdam's 1700s millionaires and their forgotten fortunes, a quiet story from history told at a calm, unhurried pace, with no rush and nowhere you need to be. If you listened to the previous night, welcome back. And if this is your first night, you can begin right here, exactly as you are. A new night will be waiting for you again tomorrow. But for now, allow yourself to rest, breathe softly, and let this story slowly carry you into sleep. As night settled gently over Amsterdam in the early years of the 18th century, the city transformed into something softer, quieter, and almost weightless. The busy rhythms of trade and commerce, so dominant during the daylight hours, slowly faded into memory as lanterns were lit one by one along the canals. Their reflections trembled on the water, stretching and bending with every small movement of the tide, as if the city itself were breathing more slowly. From a distance, Amsterdam appeared calm and composed, but beneath that calm lived centuries of ambition, wealth, and carefully guarded power. The narrow streets, paved with worn stones polished smooth by countless footsteps, no longer echoed with carts or merchants calling out their wares. Instead, the city rested. Windows were shuttered, doors were bolted, and the scent of extinguished candles drifted faintly into the night air. The canals, which during the day carried the reflections of busy lives, now mirrored only the sky above. Moonlight slipped between drifting clouds and rested gently on the water surface. The tall canal houses stood shoulder to shoulder, their facades rising like silent witnesses to generations of prosperity. Each house, though similar in shape, carried subtle differences, ornamental details carved in stone, carefully chosen brickwork, and windows positioned with deliberate precision. These homes were not built in haste. They were statements meant to endure. In this quiet hour, Amsterdam felt almost suspended in time. The city had already lived through its greatest expansion, its golden age firmly established. The ships that had once arrived daily from distant shores had built fortunes beyond imagination, and those fortunes had settled into the city's architecture, its institutions, and its rhythms. By the 1700s, Amsterdam no longer needed to shout its success. It whispered it instead. The stillness of a night revealed details that daylight often concealed. A gentle creak of wood as a house cooled, the soft lap of water against stone embankments, the distant call of a night bird passing overhead. Even the air seemed heavier, carrying with it the memory of spices, tobacco, and aged paper, remnants of trade that had reshaped the world. Within this silence, the wealth of the city remained ever present, though unseen. Behind closed doors, paintings rested in darkened rooms, ledgers lay tucked away in cabinets, and silverware gleamed faintly in the last traces of candlelight. These objects were not merely possessions. They were symbols of security, influence, and legacy. They told stories of families who had risen quietly and deliberately, guided by patience rather than spectacle. The night softened the sharp edges of the city. Wealth did not announce itself here with grandeur or noise. It lingered in proportions, in materials chosen for durability, in locations selected for permanence. Even the grandest homes seemed modest under moonlight. Their scale revealed only gradually as the eye adjusted. Amsterdam at night invited reflection. It asked questions without demanding answers. Who had walked these streets before? Who had paused at these windows, gazing out at the same canal centuries earlier? The city held its secrets close, offering only hints to those willing to look slowly and listen carefully. As the hours deepened, the sense of transition grew stronger. The city was no longer fully awake, yet not entirely asleep. It existed in a space between moments, where time moved gently and thoughts could wander without urgency. This was the hour when history felt closest, when the distance between past and present thinned. Somewhere along one of these canals stood a particular house, indistinguishable at first glance from the others. Its facade was tall and restrained, its windows dark, its doorway quiet. Yet within its walls lived a story tied deeply to the wealth that had shaped the city itself. The stones of its foundation had been laid with intention, funded by prosperity earned far beyond Amsterdam's borders. The house did not reveal its significance openly. It waited, as many things from the past do, for someone to pause long enough to notice. The night allowed such pauses. It encouraged the mind to slow, to drift, to settle gently into curiosity rather than demand. And so, as the city rested, attention began to shift, not to the canals as a whole, nor to the skyline they formed together, but to this single home, a place where wealth had once gathered quietly, where decisions were made without ceremony, and where history left its marks in subtle ways. From the outside, nothing moved, yet within the stillness lay the beginning of a deeper story, one that unfolded room by room, generation by generation, carried forward by the quiet persistence of time. The night held its breath, and the city waited. The house that had drawn attention at the end of the night did not stand apart from its neighbors in any dramatic way. It did not rise higher than the others, nor did it demand notice through excess or decoration. And yet, as the moonlight rested upon its facade, something about it felt deliberate, carefully considered, and quietly assured. This was how wealth presented itself in Amsterdam during the early 1700s, not loudly, but with confidence built into brick and stone. The canal houses of this era were designed as both homes and statements. Their narrow fronts were shaped by city regulations and canal taxes. Yet within those constraints, families expressed status through proportion, symmetry, and materials. The house's windows were evenly spaced, their frames solid and well-maintained. The bricks, darker than those of more modest dwellings, had been chosen for durability as much as appearance. Nothing was accidental here. Behind the front door lay a world arranged with order and intention. The entrance hall stretched deeper than expected, guiding visitors inward rather than outward. Floors were laid with stone imported at great expense, worn smooth by years of careful footsteps. Even in darkness, the structure of the space could be sensed, a balance between openness and restraint that reflected the values of its owners. Such houses were built not for display alone, but for continuity. Families expected to inhabit them for generations. Every beam, every stair, every carved detail was an investment not only of money, but of foresight. These walls were meant to shelter wealth, to preserve it, and to pass it quietly from one era to the next. The rooms unfolded gradually. A front chamber overlooking the canal allowed its occupants to observe the city without being part of it. Further inside, larger rooms opened into spaces meant for reflection, study, and careful planning. Furniture was solid and understated, crafted to last rather than impress. Paintings hung low and unlit now, their subjects sleeping in darkness along with the city outside. At night, the house seemed to exhale. The warmth of the day faded slowly, wood contracting with soft sounds that blended into the silence. Candles, once extinguished, left faint traces of smoke that clung to the air. The wealth contained within these walls did not stir. It rested. The design of these homes revealed much about the mindset of their owners. Wealth in Amsterdam's golden age was rarely impulsive. It was accumulated patiently, often invisibly, through systems of trade, finance, and long-term agreements. The houses reflected this patience. They favored depth over width, substance over ornament, endurance over spectacle. Looking closely, subtle signs of affluence appeared. Imported wood-formed ceilings high above the ground floor. Glass panes, still expensive at the time, filled the windows with clarity rather than distortion. Iron fixtures were shaped with care, their curves smooth beneath the touch. Even the doors themselves were heavier than necessary, designed to close firmly and remain closed. From the outside, these homes formed an unbroken rhythm along the canal. Their shared roof lines created a visual harmony that spoke of collective prosperity. No single house overwhelmed the others. Together, they told a story of a city built on cooperation as much as competition. The canals themselves played an essential role in this architecture. They were both arteries and mirrors, reflecting the houses back upon themselves. Water softened the outlines of stone and brick, lending the entire street a dreamlike quality after sunset. It was as if the wealth of the city dissolved gently into the night, becoming less tangible, more atmospheric. Inside the houses, the arrangement of space followed a quiet logic. Upper floors held private rooms, removed from the concerns of the street. Attics stored goods and records, the physical evidence of fortunes made and managed. Basements, cool and dry, safeguarded valuables that required protection from time and moisture. Nothing here suggested haste. These homes had been constructed during years when success was expected to endure. Their builders assumed stability, continuity, and control. Even as the world beyond Amsterdam shifted and expanded, the houses remained anchored, confident in their permanence. Yet the night revealed something else as well, a sense of stillness that hinted at fragility. For all their solidity, these structures depended on the fortunes that sustained them. They were expressions of wealth, but also reminders that wealth required constant attention. Without care, even the strongest foundations could weaken. As the moon traced its slow path across the sky, shadows shifted along the canal facades. Windows reflected faint light, then darkness again. The houses watched the night pass, unchanged, as they had watched countless nights before. Within one of these homes, beyond the quiet rooms and resting objects, lived the memory of the family who had commissioned its construction. Their choices, ambitions, and calculations were embedded in the walls. Though they slept elsewhere, or perhaps no longer slept at all, their presence lingered. The house did not speak, yet it communicated everything its owners had valued: stability, discretion, foresight, and control. It stood as a vessel for a life shaped by wealth earned far from these canals, wealth that flowed inward through trade routes and financial networks stretching across oceans. And so, as the night deepened, attention moved naturally from the structure itself to the people who had given it purpose. The house had spoken of wealth in silence. Now, it invited reflection on those who had lived within its walls, those whose fortunes had built not only homes, but the identity of the city itself. From stone and wood, the story shifted gently toward human hands and decisions, toward lives measured not in noise, but in quiet accumulation. By the time the moon had climbed higher over the quiet canals, the focus of the night's reflection shifted from the houses themselves to the people who had filled them with purpose and presence. These were not merely structures of brick and mortar. They were homes carefully inhabited by families whose fortunes had been quietly amassed over decades, in some cases, over centuries. The millionaires of Amsterdam were figures of subtle authority, of persistent influence, and of remarkable foresight, yet their lives were measured in restraint rather than spectacle. In the early 1700s, the wealthiest families were often intertwined through business, marriage, and community. They were merchants who had sailed beyond the horizon to acquire goods unimaginable to the average citizen. Spices from the East Indies, fine silks from distant lands, rare woods that carried the scent of foreign forests. Their ships, flying the proud flags of the Dutch Republic, moved across oceans, connecting Amsterdam to ports far away, and filling warehouses along the canals with commodities that seemed almost magical in their rarity and value. Yet not all wealth flowed directly from trade. Some families had been bankers or financiers, investing carefully in the growing economy, managing credits and debts with precision. Their names might not have been spoken aloud in the streets, but in the quiet halls of commerce, they commanded respect. Contracts were signed in ink and secrecy. Fortunes shifted with the subtle movements of markets, and power was exercised with the weight of discretion rather than noise. These millionaires were acutely aware of the fragility of their positions. The city offered opportunity, but it also demanded vigilance. Trade routes could be disrupted, political tides could turn, and ships could vanish in storms. Yet, over generations, families had learned the art of endurance. Each household maintained meticulous records, every transaction preserved in ledgers that detailed even the smallest sums. It was this combination of daring and caution that allowed fortunes to grow steadily, quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet with remarkable cumulative effect. Despite the vast sums they controlled, life within their homes was surprisingly ordered and disciplined. Children were educated in the arts, languages, and the management of business affairs from a young age, often under the guidance of tutors who themselves had traversed foreign cities or mastered the subtle intricacies of finance. Education was both a privilege and a responsibility, intended to ensure that the family's prosperity would not dissipate with a single generation. Even leisure was conducted with the same mindfulness. Gardens, often hidden behind the facades of the city, offered quiet retreats where the wealthiest could contemplate nature, far from the bustle of merchants and sailors. Libraries held volumes that chronicled geography, mathematics, and philosophy, and were arranged to encourage reflection and learning. Music, softly played within the drawing rooms, provided moments of calm, reinforcing the sense that life, though richly provisioned, was meant to be measured and deliberate. The social networks of these families further strengthened their position. Alliances were formed with care. Marriages often intertwined households, consolidating wealth and influence. Decisions were made with awareness of both immediate needs and long-term stability. Even casual dinners could hold purpose, each gesture and conversation contributing to a larger tapestry of security and reputation. The night, silent outside, mirrored the quiet vigilance within. Candlelight flickered against painted walls and polished wood, casting slow-moving shadows across rooms that held the accumulated evidence of decades of careful management. Wealth manifested not as ostentation, but as a deliberate, controlled presence that permeated the architecture, the collections, and the very rhythm of daily life. At times, visitors passing these canal houses might sense an air of mystery. Few could imagine the full extent of the fortunes contained behind closed doors. Accounts were kept private, agreements signed discreetly, and decisions regarding business or inheritance discussed only in hushed tones. The city itself became a witness to these subtle dynamics, absorbing the echoes of prosperity without disturbing its quietude. The families of Amsterdam's millionaires were often tied to the city in ways beyond commerce. They funded local projects, supported artisans, and contributed to civic initiatives, not necessarily out of altruism, but from understanding that influence extended far beyond material accumulation. Reputation, honor, and continuity were currencies as potent as gold, and the night's silence seemed to preserve both. As the observer moves deeper into the story, it becomes evident that wealth was inseparable from identity. These millionaires were custodians of a way of life that demanded discretion, patience, and foresight. Their daily routines, though not extravagant in ostentation, were precise and intentional. Even the smallest household tasks were approached with care, reflecting an awareness that the management of wealth required attention to detail in every aspect of existence. The quiet of the night allowed one to imagine these families' lives as more than mere financial success. It revealed a tapestry woven from generations of decisions, some bold, some cautious, all deliberate. The city itself seemed to acknowledge these lives, its canals and streets offering both a framework and a canvas on which fortunes were inscribed, visible to those attuned to subtlety, invisible to the casual eye. And yet, for all their careful planning, these lives were never static. External forces, storms at sea, fluctuations in trade, political shifts, could change the course of fortunes in a single season. Still, the families of Amsterdam adapted, learned, and endured, their resilience as quiet and steady as the moonlight that bathed their homes each night. The narrative of the millionaires slowly expands beyond the walls of individual houses to the city as a whole. Their influence shaped not only architecture and commerce, but also culture and societal structure. Every canal, every street, and every quiet corner of Amsterdam bore the imprint of their choices. At night, as the world rested, these imprints became almost tangible, visible only to those who observed patiently and allowed the mind to drift across time. From this reflection arises an understanding that wealth, in this context, was inseparable from patience, foresight, and an enduring relationship with both city and community. Each family's story was a quiet, continuous thread woven into the larger fabric of Amsterdam's history, a history that could now be followed in the stillness of night. And so, As the night deepened and the city held its quiet vigil, attention naturally began to shift from the structures and families themselves to the mechanisms by which they had accumulated such wealth. The stage was set to explore the silent, methodical flow of money, the networks and trades that turned ambition into enduring prosperity. As the city of Amsterdam rested under the soft glow of the moon, the lifeblood of its immense fortunes continued to pulse in subtle, invisible ways. Money, though intangible in the silence of the night, had its own rhythms, flowing through the arteries of trade, investment, and enterprise. It moved silently from ship to warehouse, from ledger to ledger, and from family to family, shaping lives and landscapes alike without ever drawing attention to itself. The Great Dutch East India Company, or VOC, was at the heart of this quiet flow. Its ships, brimming with spices, silks, and other treasures, crossed oceans while the city slept, guided by seasoned navigators whose knowledge spanned both the stars above and the waves below. Each arrival of cargo at the harbor represented the culmination of months of planning, negotiation, and risk-taking. Yet when the goods were finally unloaded, the city barely stirred. To most inhabitants, the flow of wealth was invisible, a quiet current beneath the familiar hum of daily life. Within the city, the movement of money followed patterns as deliberate as the currents in the canals. Bills of exchange were issued with careful calculation, allowing merchants to conduct business without the physical transfer of gold. Ledgers in private homes and banks recorded transactions with meticulous precision, ensuring that each coin could be accounted for, yet the process remained almost imperceptible to those outside the circle of commerce. Wealth circulated, but it did so silently, leaving little evidence of the immense power it carried. Families who controlled these fortunes maintained complex networks of trust. Agents in foreign ports acted on their behalf, navigating markets and negotiating deals that would ripple back to Amsterdam in the form of profit. Letters carried instructions across continents, guiding decisions that affected both immediate outcomes and long-term prosperity. The city's elite understood that control over these flows required patience, foresight, and unwavering attention, and they cultivated these qualities with care. This quiet circulation of wealth influenced more than commerce alone. It shaped the very fabric of the city, the construction of houses, the adornment of streets, and the sponsorship of art and architecture. Each canal house, with its precise facade and enduring structure, was a testament to the careful management of resources. The movement of money allowed not only for personal comfort, but also for the projection of stability and refinement, echoing across the city like the subtle shimmer of moonlight on water. Even the simplest acts carried financial significance. A shipment of grain, a consignment of cloth, a ledger entry, all were components in a vast, intricate system that supported the wealth of families whose influence stretched far beyond the city's walls. Each coin, each transaction, was a thread in a larger tapestry, connecting Amsterdam to distant lands, distant seas, and distant markets. Yet in the quiet of night, all of this was hidden, leaving only the impression of a city at peace, unaware of the currents beneath its streets. Trade routes were mapped with precision, balancing risk and reward. Ships leaving the harbor carried goods bound for markets that would return profit months later. The families of Amsterdam understood that fortune was not static. It required continuous attention and adaptability. Contracts and letters of credit ensured that the flow of wealth remained steady, even when storms, piracy, or political instability threatened to disrupt the rhythm. Patience, above all, was the key to sustaining prosperity. The canals themselves mirrored this process, reflecting not only the architecture of the city, but the invisible flows of capital that coursed beneath it. Boats laden with merchandise moved with purpose, while warehouses received and dispatched goods quietly, their interiors lit by candlelight, revealing the organized chaos of a city built on commerce. Even the smallest transaction contributed to the grand narrative of wealth, and yet, from the perspective of an observer walking past, all appeared tranquil and orderly. The people at the center of these flows maintained discretion at every level. Meetings were held in drawing rooms illuminated by soft candlelight. Contracts were signed with care, and ledgers were closed with deliberate precision. There was no ostentation in the process. The work of managing wealth was conducted with the same calm dignity that marked the architecture of the houses themselves. Silence was as important as skill, for it preserved the continuity of fortune from one generation to the next. At night, the quiet flow of money could almost be felt as a gentle pulse within the city. Though invisible, it was pervasive, touching every aspect of life, shaping the possibilities and limitations of those who lived along the canals. Wealth determined which families could maintain large homes, employ tutors for their children, and support artisans and musicians. It dictated the rhythm of daily life, the pace of construction, and the longevity of influence. Yet all of this occurred subtly, unobtrusively, beneath the veneer of calm. The sophistication of Amsterdam's financial networks became apparent when viewed across time. Families understood that the accumulation of wealth was not an end but a continuous process, requiring attention to detail, strategic alliances, and careful risk assessment. They navigated international markets, financed shipping expeditions, and managed local commerce, all with a patience that matched the city's measured rhythm. The quiet flow of money was not simply a system of transactions. It was a reflection of intellect, discipline, and foresight. The night offered a vantage point from which to observe these forces without the distraction of daily activity. The city's lights glimmered softly on the water, each house and warehouse representing not only physical presence, but also the hidden currents of prosperity that defined life in Amsterdam. The flow of money connected past and present, individual and collective, city and world. It was a living, breathing network, delicate yet enduring, guiding the lives of those who understood its power. As attention shifts naturally from the circulation of capital to the people who wielded it, the story prepares to move toward the quieter aspects of daily life. The wealth, so carefully accumulated and managed, was inseparable from the routines and rhythms of the city's elite. Their influence was manifest not only in architecture and trade, but in the structured patterns of living, the cultivation of knowledge, and the thoughtful orchestration of family and legacy. The night remains calm as these reflections deepen, guiding the observer through an understanding of the subtle mechanisms that shaped Amsterdam's prosperity. The city sleeps, yet the quiet flow of money continues, invisible, continuous, and integral to the story that unfolds. With the quiet flow of money understood, the focus of the night gently shifts toward the lives it shaped, the daily existence of those fortunate few whose fortunes were vast yet discreetly managed. In Amsterdam's canal houses, life was an intricate weave of routine, responsibility, and subtle indulgence, a rhythm that reflected both the privilege and the careful discipline required to sustain wealth across generations. The day in these households began not with hurried motion, but with deliberate preparation. Light seeped softly through tall windows, illuminating polished wooden floors and delicate tapestries that hung quietly along walls. In the mornings, the household stirred to a gentle rhythm. Servants moved unobtrusively, preparing meals, attending to the fires, and ensuring that each space was orderly. Every detail, from the placement of a chair to the alignment of a ledger on a desk, was considered with precision, evidence of a lifestyle built on control and foresight. Children were introduced early to lessons in culture, commerce, and etiquette, guided by tutors who were themselves chosen for knowledge, discretion, and reliability. Education was more than preparation for adulthood. It was an essential element in the preservation of the family's legacy. Even leisure was structured, often intertwined with opportunities to observe business practices, attend music recitals, or appreciate art. Every action within these households, however serene it appeared, carried the weight of expectation and the continuity of tradition. Meals reflected both refinement and subtle display. Ingredients imported from across the seas were prepared with care, their flavors celebrated quietly, without ostentation. Dining was not merely sustenance, but a ritual, a reinforcement of values, status, and knowledge. The table became a site of learning, where subtle instruction and observation reinforced lessons in patience, discernment, and the proper conduct befitting a family of means. Art and literature were central to daily life. Libraries, often illuminated by candlelight during the early hours, offered volumes on philosophy, geography, and mathematics, alongside collections of poetry and history. Paintings adorned walls in deliberate arrangement, each canvas selected not for mere decoration, but to convey taste, sensibility, and a quiet understanding of culture. These objects of contemplation encouraged reflection, guiding both thought and demeanor in a manner as steady and unhurried as the canals themselves. Evening routines carry their own rhythm. The soft toll of church bells marked the transition from work to reflection. In private chambers, families recorded accounts, corresponded with distant partners, and prepared for the decisions that the next day would require. Wealth required vigilance, yet this vigilance was never frantic. Rather, it was a slow, measured awareness, practiced with the same precision and calm that characterized the city's architecture. The presence of servants was essential but discreet. Their movements were choreographed to ensure that the household ran smoothly, without drawing attention to the operations that supported this life of calm privilege. Every action, whether lighting a fire, polishing a desk, or arranging flowers in a vase, was performed to maintain order, beauty, and tranquility, reinforcing the stability of the family's environment. Gardens, often hidden behind high walls, provided spaces for contemplation. These enclosed green spaces, filled with carefully tended flowers, herbs, and ornamental trees, were refuges from the rigors of commerce and the demands of legacy. They allowed residents to observe nature, to breathe, and to reflect quietly on both personal and family ambitions. The gentle rustle of leaves, the soft trickle of fountains, and the occasional flight of birds contributed to an atmosphere that encouraged serenity and thoughtfulness. The management of wealth was interwoven with the rhythms of daily life. Ledgers, correspondence, and contracts were attended to with diligence, often in rooms with high windows and soft lighting. Decisions were made in consideration of not only immediate needs, but long-term consequences. Each movement of money a deliberate act, designed to preserve and enhance prosperity. These acts were rarely public. Their power was inherent, sustained by precision rather than display. Social interactions were equally measured. Visits, meetings, and exchanges were conducted with care, reinforcing alliances and connections essential to the maintenance of status. Hospitality was extended with discretion. Generosity was evident, yet always paired with a subtle reinforcement of the household's values and influence. Through these interactions, families reinforced their position, ensuring that each generation would inherit not only material wealth, but the wisdom and networks necessary to preserve it. The sensory environment of these homes was deliberately curated. The warmth of fires, the soft glow of candlelight, and the careful arrangement of furniture created spaces that encouraged calm reflection. Even sounds were moderated. The creak of floorboards, the rustle of curtains, and the occasional distant call of a night bird blended into a background of tranquility. This attention to detail reinforced a sense of order and calm that permeated the daily routines of the wealthy. As the day gave way to night, the focus returned to reflection and contemplation. Residents moved slowly through their homes, observing the quiet spaces, reviewing records, and preparing for the rhythms of the coming day. Even as commerce and fortune remained ever-present forces, the night allowed space for thought, meditation, and the subtle enjoyment of life's comforts. These routines, observed over time, created a continuity that linked past, present, and future. Wealth was not merely an accumulation of goods or currency. It was the product of disciplined, thoughtful living. The city's richest families understood that their lives, their homes, and their possessions were part of a carefully maintained ecosystem, one that required vigilance, patience, and the gentle orchestration of daily practice. The canals outside reflected the calm order within. Boats passed silently in the dim light, their cargoes carefully managed, their crews aware of the city's rhythms. Moonlight cast long shadows across water and stone, mirroring the subtle movements of households that maintained their prosperity with quiet skill. Each house, each room, each family contributed to the collective sense of calm and order that defined Amsterdam at night. Through this reflection, it becomes apparent that wealth in Amsterdam was inseparable from daily discipline. It was lived, maintained, and observed in the smallest actions as much as the grandest gestures. The quiet, ordered life of these families ensured that prosperity endured, shaping not only the structures they inhabited, but the city itself. The interplay of calm, precision, and foresight wove a story that spanned generations, one that continues to whisper through the canals long after the lights have dimmed. As Amsterdam slumbered beneath a quiet sky, the minds of the night's observers are naturally drawn to a question that whispers through the centuries. How would the wealth of these 1700s millionaires compare to fortunes of the modern world? The question is not meant to be answered quickly, for its answer requires careful reflection, an understanding of value, influence, and the structures that define prosperity across time. In the early 18th century, the richest families of Amsterdam commanded resources that, in sheer quantity and scope, rivaled some of today's billionaires. Their ships transported spices, silks, and rare goods from continents away, each cargo a potential fortune in itself. Warehouses filled with commodities formed the backbone of their wealth. Yet it was not just the material holdings that mattered. It was control over trade, the networks of credit, and the steady, deliberate accumulation of assets. Unlike today's instant transactions, the creation of wealth then was slow and methodical. Every shipment, every ledger entry, and every contract represented careful negotiation, patience, and risk management. A lost ship could erase months of profit, yet families developed systems of insurance, partnerships, and diversification that allowed them to endure and even prosper amidst adversity. In many ways, the 1700s millionaires were pioneers of what would later become global financial systems. Comparing their fortunes to modern billionaires is an exercise in both imagination and calculation. While today's tycoons often manage assets in virtual space, stocks, bonds, digital currencies, the Amsterdam elite's riches were tangible, embedded in real estate, ships, goods, and the labor of countless individuals. A single warehouse could represent a fortune equivalent to tens of millions today, while fleets of ships could compound that wealth to levels that, when adjusted for inflation, would indeed rival contemporary billionaires. Yet influence and lifestyle must also be considered. The wealthiest Amsterdam families did not live in ostentatious luxury, as is common in some modern circles. Their homes were refined, elegant, and substantial, but they embodied discretion. The grandeur of their possessions was measured not in spectacle, but in enduring quality and utility. Education, culture, and social networks were extensions of their wealth, ensuring that prosperity would survive beyond the mere accumulation of material goods. Moreover, the socio-political context amplified their influence. In a city structured around trade, credit, and civic participation, the richest families wielded authority not just through money, but through governance and social expectation. Positions on boards, councils, and trade associations allowed them to shape regulations, access exclusive opportunities, and consolidate power, blending financial and political capital in ways that modern wealth does not always reflect. The quiet comparison extends even further. Today's billionaires often have their lives chronicled by media, their wealth and movements public. In contrast, Amsterdam's millionaires were largely invisible outside their circles. Privacy and discretion were as valuable as gold, and the subtle accumulation of influence was as important as any shipment or ledger entry. Wealth, in their context, was inseparable from strategy, foresight, and patience. It is also illuminating to consider the impact of these fortunes on the city itself. The infrastructure, buildings, art, and institutions funded by their wealth created lasting legacies that shaped not only commerce but culture. Modern wealth often changes with the pace of global markets, visible yet fleeting. The fortunes of 1700s Amsterdam, though subject to risk, were anchored in tangible, enduring investments that left an imprint on the cityscape and society alike. Even the perception of wealth differed. While contemporary billionaires may define success through acquisition and visibility, Amsterdam's elite measured it through stability, continuity, and the careful orchestration of resources over generations. A family's prosperity was demonstrated not by flamboyance, but by the longevity of its influence and the preservation of its estates. This quiet, strategic approach allowed them to maintain control over both assets and society in ways that wealth alone cannot always guarantee today. From a nighttime perspective, the city itself seems to whisper these comparisons. The calm canals, the uniform facades of homes, the orderly warehouses, they are physical reminders of wealth accumulated with care and maintained with diligence. The stillness of night invites reflection. These fortunes, though centuries old, carried a weight and presence that rivaled even the most publicized wealth of the modern era. In the end, comparing the 1700s millionaires to today's billionaires is less a matter of mathematics than of understanding context. Modern currency and technology allow for rapid accumulation and mobility of assets, but the Amsterdam elite relied on networks, relationships, and meticulous planning. Their influence was both deep and wide, extending through generations and shaping the very city around them. When observed in the quiet of night, their impact is palpable, a silent resonance that lingers in the structures, canals, and careful rhythms of the city. And so, as the moonlight continues to drift across the water, the mind can dwell on both the scale and the subtlety of these fortunes. Wealth is not simply a number. It is a reflection of discipline, foresight, and the careful orchestration of life. In that sense, the Amsterdam millionaires of the 1700s remain, even today, figures of profound significance, their quiet dominance echoing across centuries. The story naturally flows onward, guiding attention from the magnitude of wealth to the ways it shaped not only households but entire communities. As the moonlight glimmered softly over Amsterdam's canals, the city's grandeur seemed almost still, frozen in reflection. Yet behind the tall, elegant facades of the canal houses, history whispered quietly through hidden corridors, staircases, and rooms. Every house contained layers of stories, each unfolding over decades, sometimes centuries, stories that rarely left the confines of walls lined with polished wood, paintings, and books. In the hush of night, one could almost sense these silent narratives waiting to be discovered. The wealth of the city's millionaires was not only a reflection of trade and property, but also of the lives lived within these walls. Each house contained secrets, private journals, correspondence with distant partners, and collections of personal artifacts that spoke of ambition, triumph, and sometimes sorrow. The inhabitants, conscious of legacy, often recorded events with care, preserving details that might otherwise have faded into obscurity. These records, whether meticulously catalogued or hidden in drawers and cupboards, formed an invisible tapestry of human experience. Even in rooms meant for leisure, subtle histories unfolded. Drawing rooms with soft candlelight, once places of conversation and reflection, held memories of strategic decisions, quiet triumphs, and the guidance of young heirs. Libraries with shelves stretching toward the ceiling were not only repositories of knowledge, but also spaces where ideas and plans for commerce and society intersected with personal contemplation. The books themselves, annotated by careful hands, bore silent witness to the intellectual pursuits of families whose wealth extended beyond material possessions. Some stories were dramatic yet understated. A single letter, folded carefully and hidden beneath a ledger, might recount a risky voyage or a negotiation that ensured the survival of a family fortune. Paintings on walls sometimes captured more than aesthetic beauty. They commemorated partnerships, alliances, or moments of personal achievement. Candles flickered over these artifacts, casting shadows that seemed to animate the hidden histories, whispering the tales only the night could hear. The architecture of the homes also concealed stories. Hidden compartments, secret staircases, and subtly reinforced rooms suggestive of both practicality and protection reflected the foresight of their owners. Families anticipated challenges ranging from financial uncertainty to political upheaval, designing their homes to safeguard both possessions and privacy. These structural choices, often unnoticed by visitors, formed a silent dialogue between space and inhabitant, weaving narrative and utility together seamlessly. Even the quietest chambers held traces of human experience. Bedrooms, often austere compared to modern expectations, contained personal effects, writing desks, simple musical instruments, and clothing meticulously cared for, reminders of the intimate lives of those within. The careful organization of these rooms reflected not only taste, but also an awareness that the minutiae of daily life contributed to broader stability and legacy. Across generations, these stories accumulated, creating continuity even as individual lives changed. Servants, often invisible in historical accounts, played crucial roles in preserving and transmitting knowledge. Their diligence maintained not only order, but also the context for understanding family history, keeping records, managing correspondence, and ensuring that legacies remained intact. Through their quiet labor, the pulse of these households persisted with calm regularity. The city's quiet nights offered the perfect setting to appreciate these hidden histories. Streets reflected in water, windows glowing softly with candlelight, and subtle sounds of distant boats or birds created a backdrop where one could imagine centuries of life unfolding behind closed doors. It is in this stillness that the true magnitude of influence and personal narrative becomes apparent, linking individual experience to broader currents of commerce, culture, and society. Beyond the material, these walls housed lessons of resilience and foresight. Decisions made in private rooms often had far-reaching consequences, shaping not only family fortunes, but also the development of the city. Quiet discussions about trade, alliances, and civic responsibility left indelible marks on both architecture and social networks. Wealth and personal story were intertwined, each supporting the other in a delicate balance maintained with care and patience. Night, in its quiet majesty, encourages contemplation of these layered histories. The observer may drift mentally through hallways lined with paintings, past libraries thick with volumes, and into rooms where decisions shaped not only daily life, but the trajectory of generations. The stories hidden within these walls are as much about human character, wisdom, discipline, patience, as they are about tangible wealth, revealing the subtle artistry of lives lived thoughtfully and deliberately. In the end, the houses themselves become narrators. Their staircases, chambers, and carefully constructed facades hold silent testimony to the lives within, preserving tales of enterprise, caution, learning, and quiet ambition. They whisper of human ingenuity and the delicate balance of fortune and prudence, waiting patiently for attentive minds to wander through their corridors and uncover the nuances of life in Amsterdam's wealthiest homes. As the night deepens, one senses that these hidden stories, though centuries old, continue to resonate. Their quiet presence, intertwined with architecture, artifacts, and the ebbing flow of wealth, forms an invisible thread connecting past generations with the observer of today. And as attention gradually drifts toward the next layer of historical narrative, the mind is prepared to explore the ways in which these legacies extended beyond individual households to the city itself. In the quiet of Amsterdam's nights, one can sense that the fortunes of the city's wealthy were more than mere accumulation of wealth. They were lifelines linking past, present, and future. Family legacy and inheritance formed the foundation upon which each household's identity rested, carefully nurtured and planned with meticulous precision. The inheritance of wealth was not simply a transfer of material goods. It was a transmission of responsibility, knowledge, and social influence, all intertwined in a framework designed to endure across generations. The preparation for inheritance began long before the passing of a parent or elder. Families maintained detailed records of possessions, property, and financial arrangements. Ledgers, often multiple and meticulously kept, documented every transaction, contract, and investment. These records ensured clarity when the time came to allocate assets and, more importantly, to prevent disputes that could fracture both wealth and family cohesion. In these quiet hours, one imagines a room lined with books and papers, soft candlelight illuminating the careful handwriting of accountants and scribes. Education played a central role in preparing heirs to inherit responsibly. Children were tutored not only in literacy and numeracy, but also in commerce, diplomacy, and civic duty. Understanding trade networks, international markets, and local regulations was essential for maintaining the flow of wealth established by previous generations. Even leisure and cultural exposure were part of this preparation, as they instilled a sense of taste, discipline, and judgment that complemented financial acumen. The legacy of a family was as much about cultivating character and foresight as it was about assets. The process of inheritance extended beyond material wealth. Positions within trade companies, civic offices, and guilds were often considered part of a family's estate. Passing on influence, authority, and responsibility required careful orchestration. Letters and instructions were sometimes drafted long in advance, guiding heirs in how to navigate complex social and commercial networks. In this way, the family's reach extended beyond immediate possessions, ensuring that influence remained intact and active across generations. Within households, discussions of succession were both practical and symbolic. Certain rooms were reserved for confidential conversations, where strategies were considered and decisions documented. Family members learned not only the specifics of who would inherit what, but also the broader expectations of stewardship. Wealth was a trust, and heirs were expected to honor that trust through judicious management, measured ambition, and thoughtful participation in social and commercial life. Unexpected events, from economic downturns to illness, made these preparations essential. Contingency plans ensured continuity, even when circumstances shifted. Trusts, partnerships, and contractual arrangements provided resilience, allowing families to maintain control over their assets and influence regardless of the unpredictability of life. The deliberate, methodical approach to legacy reflected a deep understanding of risk, demonstrating that wealth without foresight could quickly unravel. Inheritance also shaped the rhythm of daily life. Decisions about education, marriage, and alliances were all influenced by considerations of legacy. Marriages were carefully arranged to reinforce social ties and consolidate wealth. Education and career paths were guided to ensure that each generation could maintain and expand the family's holdings. Even seemingly mundane choices were infused with long-term strategic significance, linking the present moment to centuries of accumulated experience. The city itself became a testament to these family legacies. Canal houses, warehouses, gardens, and civic contributions all reflected the careful orchestration of inheritance and long-term planning. Buildings were not merely residences. They were physical embodiments of a family's history and future, designed to withstand the passage of time and to continue to project influence long after the original builders had passed. Private artifacts within homes, paintings, books, letters, and furniture, served as anchors for memory and identity. They reminded heirs of their responsibilities, their heritage, and the standards expected of them. Through these objects, the ethos of the family, its discipline, taste, and vision, was transmitted silently, shaping behavior and reinforcing cohesion. In a world where wealth could easily be lost, these intangible elements of inheritance were as vital as any material asset. Even as families navigated the complexities of succession, they maintained a delicate balance between privacy and visibility. Wealth and legacy were often displayed in subtle ways. The careful upkeep of property, patronage of the arts, and participation in civic life. These displays communicated stability and influence without overt extravagance, reinforcing both status and continuity. Observers walking the quiet streets at night might glimpse the subtle markers of a family's prominence, yet the deeper structures of legacy remained largely invisible, preserved within walls, ledgers, and minds. The careful orchestration of inheritance created intergenerational continuity that extended beyond individual families. Alliances, marriages, and social networks bound the city's elite together, creating a resilient web of influence. The consequences of these decisions shaped the economic, cultural, and political landscape of Amsterdam, ensuring that wealth and legacy were not isolated phenomena, but dynamic forces within the larger society. Through all this, the quiet of the night provides perspective. One can imagine the still chambers, illuminated by candlelight, where elders contemplate the future and heirs absorb lessons in patience, prudence, and responsibility. These households were laboratories of continuity, experimenting with methods to preserve both material wealth and the values that made its preservation meaningful. Ultimately, the story of family legacy and inheritance reveals that wealth in 1700s Amsterdam was inseparable from careful planning, disciplined stewardship, and foresight. The fortunes of the city's elite were not fleeting. They were carefully woven into the fabric of society, sustained by generations who understood the interplay between material resources, social influence, and human character. In the soft glow of night, one can sense the weight of these responsibilities and the quiet diligence required to honor them. As attention gently moves forward, it becomes clear that the narrative is not solely about money or property, but about the enduring impact of these households on culture, commerce, and history. From family legacy, the story naturally flows toward the personal habits and private contemplations that define the daily experience of these influential figures. In the quiet hours when moonlight dances upon the still waters of Amsterdam's canals, one can imagine the subtle rhythms that govern the daily life of the city's wealthiest families. Their routines, though outwardly simple, were crafted with deliberate care, a blend of habit, discipline, and quiet artistry that ensured both the maintenance of wealth and the preservation of personal and family legacy. Each day unfolded like a gentle current, flowing predictably yet filled with purpose, allowing households to function with seamless precision. Morning light, soft and muted, filtered through tall windows, illuminating rooms that were arranged with meticulous thought. Breakfasts were modest by modern expectations, but rich in quality. Fresh bread, soft cheeses, and occasionally fruits imported from distant lands. Even these meals, though quietly consumed, were part of a ritual, a beginning that established rhythm and focus for the day ahead. Family members observed certain courtesies, exchanged words with subtle warmth, and prepared for the responsibilities that awaited them. Personal grooming and attire were equally structured. Clothing, often crafted from fine materials and tailored with care, was selected not merely for appearance, but for function and symbolism. Each garment communicated social standing and respect for tradition, reinforcing both self-discipline and public perception. Mirrors reflected not vanity, but an adherence to order, a quiet reminder that every detail in life, however small, carried significance. Education and study occupied a central place in these routines. Children and young heirs spent hours under the guidance of tutors, absorbing lessons in mathematics, geography, languages, and commerce. Their studies were not merely academic. They were exercises in patience, attention, and the cultivation of discernment. Lessons were interspersed with music, poetry, and exposure to art, ensuring that intellect and sensibility developed together. Through this combination, the young were gradually prepared to navigate both the practical demands of wealth and the subtle expectations of society. Household operations followed a similarly disciplined cadence. Servants moved silently through corridors, attending fires, polishing surfaces, and arranging items with precision. Their tasks, though unseen by most, ensured the smooth functioning of daily life. The choreography of labor was subtle, deliberate, and continuous, maintaining an atmosphere of order and calm that defined the household experience. Even minor acts, such as lighting candles or folding linens, were executed with an awareness of rhythm and timing, contributing to the overall sense of harmony. Meals beyond breakfast continued the ritualized pace of life. Lunches and dinners were measured, both in content and social context. Conversation was quiet, refined, and purposeful. Dining rooms, bathed in candlelight during the evening hours, became spaces for reflection, instruction, and observation. Wealth and taste were expressed through subtle gestures. The careful placement of tableware, the arrangement of flowers, the selection of wine, but never in ostentation. In this way, daily routines reinforced both discipline and decorum. Private reflection was integral to these rituals. Quiet rooms offered spaces for reading, writing, and contemplation. Journals were maintained, accounts recorded, and plans considered for future endeavors. These moments of solitude were not mere indulgences. They were essential components of a lifestyle that valued foresight, responsibility, and careful attention to detail. Through reflection, The mind and spirit were prepared to face the challenges and decisions that accompanied both wealth and social expectation. Even the smallest domestic rituals carried significance. The cleaning and organization of spaces, the tending of gardens, and the arrangement of art and objects were acts of care that reinforced stability. Each task, repeated over days and years, became a silent testament to discipline and continuity. In these routines, wealth was not simply managed. It was expressed and preserved, woven into the very fabric of life. Social rituals complemented private ones. Visits from acquaintances, attendance at guild meetings, and participation in civic events were conducted with careful attention to timing, demeanor, and propriety. Hospitality was extended with discretion. Generosity was balanced with subtle reinforcement of social position. These interactions, though outwardly ordinary, were embedded with layers of meaning, shaping relationships, influence, and reputation. Evening brought the day's rituals to a gentle close. Candles were extinguished with care, fires banked for warmth, and rooms arranged for the night. Sleep, like every other aspect of life, was approached with intention. A restorative conclusion to a day structured around thoughtfulness, responsibility, and calm. The city outside, with its still waters and quiet streets, mirrored the order within, reflecting both the discipline and serenity cultivated through the day's rituals. In observing these routines, one realizes that they are more than habits. They're the quiet machinery of legacy. Daily rituals ensured that knowledge, responsibility, and prudence were instilled in every generation, that wealth remained secure, and that social and cultural influence endured. Each repetition, each deliberate act, contributed to a continuity that linked past, present, and future. Thus, the secrets of daily rituals reveal the subtle artistry of life among Amsterdam's elite. The stillness of night invites contemplation of these rhythms, of how the careful orchestration of seemingly mundane acts produced enduring stability. The canal houses, softly illuminated by candlelight and moonlight, become more than structures. They are living embodiments of routine, legacy, and the quiet power of habit. Through them, the story flows naturally toward the final chapter, where the city, its people, and their enduring influence are reflected upon as the night draws to a close. As the night deepens over Amsterdam, the quiet canals and the reflection of candlelit windows offer a gentle reminder that the city itself carries the legacy of its wealthiest families. The influence of 1700s millionaires is etched into the very fabric of the city, from the orderly lines of canal houses to the intricacies of civic institutions that remain to this day. Their choices, investments, and visions left enduring impressions that shaped commerce, architecture, and culture, creating a living memory woven into the city's streets and waterways. The architecture of Amsterdam bears silent testimony to these families. Canal houses, with their elegant gables and carefully proportioned facades, were designed to withstand the test of time, both physically and aesthetically. These homes were more than shelters. They were symbols of foresight and status, built to convey stability, taste, and prudence. Within these walls, generations of families lived, worked, and made decisions that resonated far beyond their immediate household. Each window, door, and beam was a participant in the story of continuity and influence, quietly shaping the urban landscape. Economic structures were similarly molded. The fortunes amassed through trade, shipping, and enterprise funded not only personal comfort, but also the growth of the city itself. Investments in warehouses, docks, and commercial ventures enabled Amsterdam to become a hub of global exchange. Even as the world evolved and markets shifted, the infrastructure laid down by these early entrepreneurs provided a foundation upon which future generations could build. Their careful planning ensured that the city remained vibrant, resilient, and interconnected with the wider world. Cultural impact flowed naturally from wealth and patronage. Art, music, and literature flourished under the subtle guidance of families who valued refinement and taste. Paintings commissioned to adorn drawing rooms, books collected in private libraries, and sponsorship of public works created a legacy that went beyond commerce. Cultural investments fostered civic pride, intellectual engagement, and aesthetic sensibility, embedding values that continue to influence social norms and collective identity. The social fabric of Amsterdam was also shaped by these families. Their participation in civic councils, guilds, and charitable organizations helped structure community life. Policies, regulations, and civic initiatives often bore the subtle imprint of these individuals, guiding trade practices, public welfare, and city planning. The invisible hand of influence extended beyond private interests, shaping the lives of citizens and the broader trajectory of the city. In reflecting upon these legacies, one notices the interplay of subtlety and permanence. Wealth alone does not ensure lasting impact. It is the careful, deliberate application of resources, knowledge, and foresight that creates enduring results. Amsterdam's millionaires understood this principle intuitively, intertwining personal gain with public benefit, aesthetics with practicality, and ambition with restraint. The result is a city that continues to carry their imprint centuries after the final ledger entries were made. Even the natural environment of the city benefited from these legacies. Canals were dredged and maintained, bridges carefully constructed, and gardens cultivated with attention to detail. These projects, while practical, also reflected a long-term vision for the city's beauty and functionality. The rhythms of daily life, transportation, trade, and leisure were structured around spaces thoughtfully designed to balance efficiency and elegance. In this, one sees the careful integration of human activity, urban planning, and environmental awareness. The intangible aspects of legacy are equally significant. Knowledge, etiquette, and cultural norms transmitted through families shaped social cohesion and civic responsibility. Heirs were guided not only in wealth management, but also in the principles of fairness, diplomacy, and stewardship. The careful transmission of these values ensured that the influence of these families extended far beyond material possessions, embedding moral and social frameworks that informed the life of the city. As night deepens, the quiet reflection of water and the soft glow of streetlights evoke the continuity of time. Observers might imagine the footsteps of merchants, artisans, and families who once navigated these streets, their lives guided by rhythms of diligence, foresight, and care. Their presence lingers not in spectacle, but in the structures, systems, and subtle patterns that continue to define Amsterdam. The city itself becomes a living monument to human effort, discipline, and vision. In conclusion, the lasting impressions of Amsterdam's 1700s millionaires are visible in architecture, commerce, culture, and social structures. Their careful orchestration of wealth, family legacy, and civic responsibility created enduring benefits, linking generations and embedding human ingenuity into the urban landscape. As the observer allows the city to drift into the quiet of night, the mind can trace these legacies, understanding that even centuries later, the impact of thoughtful, deliberate lives resonates in both subtle and profound ways. The city sleeps, yet its history continues to speak softly, guiding attention toward reflection, calm, and rest. You don't need to keep listening anymore. The story can fade into the background now, becoming softer with every moment. If you're still awake, that's perfectly fine. There's no rush and nothing you need to remember. Just let your breathing slow down, let your thoughts drift where they want to go, and allow the quiet of this night to settle around you. This story will remain here, gently playing while you rest. Tomorrow night, a new night will be waiting for you, and it's one you won't want to miss. And if sleep hasn't arrived just yet, you can quietly return to one of the previous nights and let those stories guide you instead. For now, sleep well.